Hello, everyone. This is Sal Albanese. Welcome to my podcast, Running Against the Wind. We have a great guest today. We always do. But today, we're going to be discussing an important but controversial piece of legislation in Albany called the Medical Aid and Dying Act. And my guest is Gregory Lopez, who's an activist, who's a citizen, who believed in this. And I got to meet him when he reached out to me on this legislation and asked me if I would contact a couple of lawmakers that I know, which I did. And I learned about the bill, and I learned about how it's operating across the country in a number of states. Did a little reading on it. But Gregory has been involved for quite a while in lobbying for this legislation. And I want him to share with us his experiences, describe the bill, and also talk about what it's like to lobby the legislature. Not an easy task, and you've got to be persistent and you've got to be dedicated. But it's a lesson for all of us who are interested in issues, who want to promote something that we believe in, and how to get legislators to support it. So, Gregory, welcome. Thank you for making time for this. Let's start by describing the bill that you've been advocating for a number of years.
So the Medical Aid in Dying Act is based off of legislation that was passed in Oregon in 1994 and enacted in 1997. And so all the American bills are kind of based off of that original bill. And so what it allows is for mentally competent and terminally ill adults to receive a prescription from their doctor, if they so choose, that can hasten the end of their lives.
And how many states is it in place right now?
It is 12 states plus DC. Delaware just passed it this year, so we don't have any data from there, but they are a go.
So just describe your role in promoting the bill in Albany.
So my role, I guess, is just kind of a kind of citizen activist of sorts, and my story is a little strange and maybe of interest to your listeners. So as a background, my father died of liver cancer when I was 11, and then at age 22, I returned just before defending my undergraduate senior thesis to watch my mother pass away of cancer of unknown primary. And so I have a genetic history of cancer propensity. And these kinds of experiences, plus then being trained as a doctor of pharmacy and having some clinical looks at how people actually die, and showed me that it could be painful and is not the romantic thing that Hollywood can sometimes portray it as. So I was always kind of involved a little bit in politics, but just kind of at the voting level, the kind of baseline citizen level that most people are, where I look at and I try to keep up to speed and stuff like that. And then I hit my 40th birthday. And since I'm a little bit mix of somber and snarky, I had a death-themed 40th birthday party where we did a whole bunch of different things, from pinning the sickle on the Reaper to also inviting a few organizations to try to help folks out in terms of kind of end-of-life planning. So one of the organizations that I invited was Compassion and Choices, who came to my birthday party and helped people plan living wills and told them about this. And I also found out during the time that the bill that passed while I was in college in Portland, Oregon, was also up in New York, but it has been having trouble. And I was like, that's weird. New York is so progressive. So I decided to start getting involved there, and then got deeper and deeper, and then have been at it for around 7 years.
Wow, that's amazing. 7 years, and you stuck with it. A lot of people get discouraged, after a couple of sessions dealing with lawmakers and their staffs. It's you stayed at it for 7 years. What are some of the other groups that were involved in this effort in New York?
So there's End of Life Choices New York, which is another major organization, and one of their leaders is the person who actually brought the bill to the New York State Legislature to start. And another one that comes to mind is the Completed Life Initiative, who joined on somewhat recently, but have a nice, unique take on things because they're trying to change the culture through arts education by holding lectures as well as movie viewings and the like.
And when was the bill first introduced in Albany?
I think it was 10 years ago, so I got on a little bit late. I forget if it's 10 or 11, one of those.
Wow. And who were the sponsors at that time?
The sponsors at the time was Dick Godfried and was it? Yeah, and I forget the Senate one actually. The original Senate person. It was a little bit before my time. The current sponsors are Brad Hoylman Siegel and Amy Pollan.
Wow. Well, Dick Godfrey has been a champion around these issues for years, including promoting statewide health care for New Yorkers. He's a really very sharp legislator. Of course, he now retired, but served there for many years. And actually, I'm not a big fan of people serving in the legislature forever. I'm more of a term limits guy, but there are exceptions, and I think Godfrey is certainly among them. So the bill was pending for 10 years, and with only a couple of sponsors, I assume, right, at that time.
Yeah, early on in my time with Bill, it was trying to get co-sponsors, and so I was approaching my local assembly people as well as my senator in order to try to get them to co-sponsor.
Who were they, Gregory?
I had 3 assembly people. I got 2 of them on, but I am in AD 46, so I had most recently, it's Alec Burke-Krasny, who is a Republican, and he did grant a meeting to discuss the issue. And before that, I am. I'm having trouble remembering. I'm only on my second cup of coffee, but it was a total of 3, and then currently my state senator is Andrew Gunardis.
Mm-hmm. So did the Republican Alex support it, or what was it like to meet with? Did you meet with him or his staff?
I met with him and one staff member.
And how did that go?
It met and expectations in a couple. It actually exceeded expectations in some and didn't do expectations in others. He was very kind, and it was very easy to get a meeting with him because that experience varies drastically. So he took a lot of time to discuss things. However, he did bring up some issues that were disturbing to me on other levels. That essentially his main objection was religious in nature. That he's a conservative Jew, and so he said he talked to his rabbi about it, and his rabbi said this is against Judaism, but you represent people who are not of your religion. It's also your job to represent them. And he said, I have a lot of thinking to do about it. So it was kind of left there, but it was put as a no. And sure enough, when it came to the floor, he did vote no.
He did vote no. Yeah. Well, interesting. What were some of your frustrations about promoting the legislation? What were some of the high points? I mean, 6 years. You probably write an article, a long Substack article about the experience. Most people do not stick with an issue that they believe in. They just get burnt out, because I was a legislator for 15 years, and I always tried to meet with everyone that was accessible, not to blow my own horn, but that was me. But I know many legislators just don't do that. They put you, especially if the issue is kind of a hot potato, they kind of, put you off. They're busy. You meet with a third-tier staff member and all of that. And what were some of the high points and some of the low points of that 6-year odyssey of lobbying for this bill?
I would probably say the high point was early on, and then also later on, I gained unique appreciations. When I first started doing it, I was amazed at how easy it was to kind of talk to staff members and how open the legislative process seemed. You could just, with minimal security, less than an airport, you could walk into the halls of Albany and knock on people's doors, and that's how it rolls. So that was impressive in a sense, and I was impressed with it. But then as I learned more, I found that there was a lot behind the scenes that is not apparent to that kind of first impressions viewpoint, and a lot of things happen behind closed doors. Along with that, I grew frustrated. I learned about, I guess, politics speak, that people will say certain things publicly and different things privately. And on the one hand, I understand why that occurs. But also, it can be very frustrating if you're not aware that there are essentially two languages. One is normal human and the other is politician. And you have to kind of know, oh, they're speaking politician right now, not normal human. But I did learn that to a degree, and to an extent, I see why that occurs, but it feels like kind of double speak to the uninitiated. And there's an argument to be made that maybe there's a little too much of that in today's politics. But later on, I also kind of grew an appreciation of how politics at the end of the day is kind of trying to get people to work together who have very different values. And it's like, look, we're in the same society, we're in the same neighborhood, we're in the same city, in the same state. I don't like this. You like this. How can we come to a compromise? And one of the nicer things was, like, when I was observing the Republicans and Democrats on the floor, like, there is still some amount of cordiality or respect for decorum that we are not seeing at the federal level currently. And so that was a little enlightening. I also found how I was frustrated also by how some politicians claim to be extremely open, but they do so during election season, and then essentially blow off constituents without consequence. That could be a frustrating experience, and how that varies widely between the kind of politicians that they are.
So, could I characterize your first couple of years advocating for this law as kind of, you were naive at that point about the process, and then you became politically savvy as you got more and more involved and started navigating, the staffs and the legislators themselves? Would that be an accurate depiction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I probably am still politically naive compared to many people, but I did learn a lot, so I'm less naive than I was before. Otherwise, I think that's accurate.
Yeah, but what's interesting about that is it took you quite a few years to really become familiar and savvy of how this process works. Most people, unfortunately, don't have your commitment or the time to figure it out, and they fall prey to a lot of hocus pocus on the part of the politicians, especially when it comes to hot button issues like this law. And I remember when you called me, you said you couldn't get meetings with certain folks, and you asked me to reach out, and I was happy to see that both of those folks that I reached out to actually supported the legislation at the end of the day. But I could tell there was trepidation about the bill when I talked to them about it. They were concerned, about a whole host of issues, protections, some of the religious implications. How did 10 years ago, it started with a couple of lawmakers supporting it. So you lobbied, you and your, I guess, coterie of supporters of this legislation were able to generate more and more sponsors over the years. Is that the way it worked?
That is somewhat the way it worked. The sponsorship did grow. However, many people who ultimately supported the bill did not want to co-sponsor it. And there was a kind of chicken and egg scenario where the Senate and Assembly leadership wanted a certain amount of co-sponsors, which would essentially guarantee passage. But a lot of people, while they were in favor of it, did not want to be on the record as co-sponsoring it.
Well, but they voted for it ultimately? Is that what?
Yep.
Well, at the end of the day, they voted for it. So, if they're concerned about political accountability, it doesn't matter, right? They're on the record of supporting it, right? But look, I voted for the gay rights bill in 1980. 86, I believe it was, and it was a really, really tough vote. And I remember so many legislators hiding under their desk, literally, about the pressure that came down. This bill is controversial, not as controversial as the gay rights bill was in those days, but there is obviously opposition to it, right? And could you tell us some of the arguments that were made against the bill?
Yeah, there are several. So, they a lot of them come from the religious right. However, they do couch it in secular terms. So one of the ones is the slippery slope argument. That's the biggest one. That once you open the door to this kind of legislation, then it'll start with terminally ill people for 6 months, but then it'll be a year, and then soon it will be people with incurable mental illness, and then it will soon be people who are undesirable to society, and it'll just slide down into whatever nightmare scenario they envision. And sometimes they point to Canada, especially, as the paradigmatic case of medical aid in dying gone wrong. So they think that once you open the door, then it's going to be a problem.
Has it gone wrong in Canada?
That is open to interpretation. I think there are some problematic cases in Canada. However, a lot of the problematic cases are people who were not served by their social safety net, and then who had only the option to do it. And so the statistics kind of show that these cases are few and far between, and there are problematic cases that are caught. And like one person was like recommending medical aid in dying to people instead of treatment, and that was a single individual who was then caught and disciplined. So the fact that you catch cases like these is somewhat reassuring, but there are some problematic cases in Canada. But it's kind of a false equivalency when it comes to the United States, because like I said at the outset, the bill is based off of Oregon's model, not the Canadian model, and we have very different legal traditions. So the Canada has their Bill of Rights is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And how medical aid in dying came about in Canada were that the legislature banned medical aid in dying in Canada, and then it was overturned by the Supreme Court a couple of times, and they were given a year to come up with legislation, and so they kind of hobbled it together, and then it expanded from there. Whereas the United States had its moment to put that to the test, whether our Bill of Rights implies a right to die, in 1997 through a couple of cases, and it was unanimous that the Bill of Rights does not. And so that path was shut down, and laws don't magically change themselves without legal action. So given precedent to the United States, it's a completely different ball game. And I know on the ground how hard it was to even pass the Medical Aid in Dying Act in New York that is based on Oregon law, which is only for terminally ill people and is worldwide one of the more conservative laws there are. So laws don't change themselves, and the slippery slope argument, I think, is very fallacious. I mean, it's a basic logical fallacy you learn in critical thinking.
What about the disability community? I saw some clips of some advocates for the disability community saying that this bill is problematic in terms of that community. What is their argument, and what's the counter argument?
So their argument is essentially pointing to Canada again, or some European countries, that ultimately the bill will move from terminally ill to not, and also that there could be healthcare disparities, so that that people who could be treated otherwise will be offered medical aid in dying instead. And so therefore more disabled folks are going to be ultimately shoved into or forced into medical aid in dying. So they exist, but they're a substantial minority. In that case, there have been polling of disabled folks, and overall they are in support of it. I've worked with a few disabled folks. The very first meeting I went to in Albany was with disability rights activists. And I've since worked with two others, Benny Pollock and Gene Ryan from Bay Ridge, at various times. And some of their takes on it are that...
It's my old district. I represented Bay Ridge, you know.
I know.
Go ahead.
Some people's inside take on it, from what I heard, but I don't know for a fact, is that essentially the leadership of some certain organizations are against it for reasons that could be concerning, but are ultimately not really founded in fact. And that then the leadership tells the other activists, and the activists just kind of follow the lead, but haven't read the bill, haven't looked into anything about it. But there's a lot of data against this. There's no single substantiated case of anybody with terminal illness in the United States versions of the bill who have had medical aid in dying forced upon them simply for the fact that they're disabled. And there was an open letter by Disability Rights Oregon president in the early 2020s who said that over the course of Oregon's history, he's heard complaints from disabled folks that the Oregon rights bill discriminates, but it discriminates against them because they can't access it. Because one of the safeguards of all American laws is you have to self-administer. A doctor cannot push a plunger, your relative cannot do it. It is you ultimately either drinking something or perhaps pushing a plunger when you have a tube going into your gut that would administer the medication. So one of the major safeguards is that you have to self-administer. And the thing is, this argument also sometimes proves too much. I mean, there has been a very widespread historical abuse of abortion for in disability over time. I don't need to mention the graphic details, but it exists. Yet nobody on the left is necessarily saying we need to ban abortion because it's been forced upon people in China, or we should stop sterilization because the Uyghurs in China were sterilized. And so when the argument's applied, it's selective. And so ultimately there are fears that are somewhat valid on the side of the disability, some aspects of the disability rights community. However, part of a politician's job, in my view, and one of the disappointments is they don't sometimes do a good job of this, is taking a look at people's valid fears and saying, well, I get it, but the perception is not really what's going on. And we see this over and over again from crime in New York, whether it's skyrocketing. I mean, I grew up in New York City. I know what it was like in the 80s. Maybe crime is up a little bit, but it ain't the 80s. And also the lots of other examples, like there were disability rights folks who are against open streets and are currently suing the city, and there are people who are pro open streets, and sometimes they could explain to their communities overall there are ways these may not be necessarily you could be afraid of lots of things and have some reason for it, but sometimes the reasons aren't well founded.
So describe the technical aspect of this. How does someone, if this bill passes, achieve that objective of dying with medical aid? How does that work?
Yeah, so in short, you are going to a doctor because you're very, very sick. And then the doctor says, you're dying at this point. You have 6 months or less to live. And at that point, you can request medical aid in dying, and you have to do written as well as oral request, and the request has to be witnessed by two people who don't have a vested interest in it, and they are explicitly laid out in the law. And so people who are heirs, people who are relatives, people in the facility, if they have a vested interest in getting you out the door a little quicker, they can't be witnesses, any of that. And they're attesting that you want this and that you're under no coercion to do so. Doctors also, at that point in the law, are required to go over palliative care options as well and say, look, there's ways to possibly mitigate or control stuff. Here it is, and the law mandates that it has to be culturally appropriate. The law also then requires a second doctor to confirm the terminal diagnosis. And unlike other states, New York's law is a little bit stronger in that these both have to be physicians who do that, whereas some other states allow other medical professionals to make the determination. Then if either of the medical doctors thinks that you don't have mental capacity to make this decision, the law mandates a psychiatric referral to a psychological professional with the appropriate training, which is another strength of New York's law compared to other laws. So New York's law is actually a little tighter than some of the other existing laws around. So then you kind of go through this process, and ultimately, then if you are deemed to have less than 6 months to live, you got the witnesses. There's the psychiatric evaluation if a doctor thinks you don't have mental capacity to make the decision. Ultimately, then you could be written a prescription that is a mix of bitter medications that, when ingested, it's a kind of a powder, and it'll end your life within minutes to hours tops, and it's quite So it's pretty, and it's quick and painless, and it is usually it's like tastes very bad. So there another objection people had were like, what if kids get into it and start eating it? And it's like, now it's like, what if kids start getting into poop and start eating it? Like, is that really going to happen? And also, you often mix it with a sweet substance, and then, or for people who can't drink necessarily, they could, it could be set up and put in a bag that goes into the gut. And so then when you're ready, then you can self-ingest through one of the methods, either drinking or pushing the plunger. When the time comes.
What is the plunger? I don't know. What do you mean, the plunger?
Oh, so if you can't drink, you could get like a feeding tube into your gut. Like if you don't have the capacity to move things, and so there can be a tube placed, and then you could.
If you're disabled or just can't move your arms, that's the way to do it.
Yeah. That is currently an option. The methods of administration, like the very specifics, are not written to the law because those things change over time according to best medical practice and new evidence. But overall, self-administration is written into the law, so somebody has to self-administer it. Nobody else can give it to you.
Okay,
and make you ingest it.
So if you're using the plunger, how do you self-administer since you can't? How does that work?
You push it.
Okay.
So up to they could set it up, but you actually have to push it.
So it has to be self-administered. No one else can do that.
No, that is illegal.
Is that the way it is in other states, or you have to? It's always self-administered.
Yeah, and that is part of that, and that is why, like, the disabled folks were complaining in Oregon, because sometimes you don't have the capacity to self-administer, and then those people are left out of all American-style laws.
Yeah, that's a little harsh if you can't do it. And but I guess some of the complaints I heard from lawmakers was that they were concerned about not having enough protection. So I assume that those items, those provisions that you just mentioned were probably added to the bill, and mandating the psychological, mandating self-administration, right? All of that, I guess, was included to make the bill more palatable to certain legislators, correct?
A lot of it started out that way because a lot of that was in the Oregon bill and the other American bills. Some specific things were changed and added. Like, so for instance, they expanded and explicitly took a look at the people who could not be witnesses. And just last year or this year, I forget, like, for instance, the list of 6 or 7 or 8 different kinds of people who cannot be a witness was expanded and looked at. And then also, I recall as well, like, they added a line, even though the original bill did say, like, terminal illness is the only thing that qualifies you for this. They also added a line explicitly saying disability on its own is not a qualifying factor for medical aid in dying. And so it's essentially said twice. And that was done to kind of make the safeguards more apparent.
Yeah, I noticed that some people from New York who are interested in medical aid and dying travel to other states, right? I read about Ed Koch's sister, who I think went to Vermont to address her, she wanted medical aid and dying, so she went to, I think it was a Vermont or Maine that she went to. Does Vermont have such a law in play?
No, Vermont does not. I believe it is New Hampshire, but I thought she may have been a resident or went to New Jersey. So the laws vary to some degree. New Jersey has a residency requirement, but I may be misremembering.
So you have to live in New Jersey to be able to to have this medical aid in dying process?
For New Jersey, you have to be a resident of New Jersey and all that entails. You can't just go there. But New Hampshire doesn't have a residency requirement, and New York does not. The bill doesn't have a residency requirement either.
What about Oregon? Does Oregon have?
Oregon had one. I am vaguely remembering, so I may be wrong, but I believe Oregon had one, and then there was a lawsuit challenging it, and Oregon agreed to lift it. So the law wasn't settled, but it was done in a settlement. The law wasn't ruled upon, but it was done in a settlement, and so it no longer does.
So if okay, so you have 2 months to live, you're in dire pain, right? And you want medical aid in dying, obviously, and you is it bureaucratic, the process? And will it take you? I mean, you've got 2 months to live. You're in dire pain. How long will all of this take? Right? You have to go see a couple of doctors, possibly a psychiatrist, witnesses. So, is it overly complicated and time consuming?
It is time consuming. And on the floor of the debate, a lot of Republicans kind of brought up the fact that New York doesn't have a mandatory waiting period in the law. But practically, that is not necessary because of the bureaucracy. It takes a while in order to do this, and it's kind of built in. And the states that started out with mandatory waiting period removed them because it just wasn't doing anything except making people suffer longer when they didn't need to. So it is a bit bureaucratic, and it is the balance between easing suffering for those who want it and making sure that the process is monitored enough so that abuse doesn't occur.
The minutes, explain to me what they were talking about when it came to the mandatory waiting period. What is that?
Well, the way, I mean, I can't see into people's hearts and minds. I'm not a psychic, but it did come off as disingenuous to me. The arguments that I saw on the floor were essentially, somebody can essentially get some cancer, go see a doctor who's like, yeah, you're totally dying, and then hop, skip, and jump into a pharmacy and say, I would like one death drug, please, and then go home and take it same day. And they were depressed. They weren't really terminally ill. This is a caricature of their view, but their view's kind of a caricature, so I don't feel too bad in mocking it a little bit. The people who are sick and looking for this at this point in time can barely move, and that's one of the reasons why it's important to go to get it passed in New York, because yes, you can go up north and take care, possibly process it in a state, or go to Oregon in a state that doesn't have a residency requirement, but by that time you are severely in pain and ill. There are people, Assemblymember Reyes she's an oncology nurse, and she had a particularly powerful statement on the assembly floor about the kinds of people who she served who may qualify for medical aid in dying, including women with breast cancer and a fungating breast wound where it's falling, their breasts are falling off and they can't be touched to dress the wound because it causes such extreme pain. They're like, don't touch me, but otherwise they're going to get infected and die, so they have to be touched. And people who have big tumors and fecal matter is literally coming out of their mouth. This is not just like somebody's like, I think I want death today, I'm going to go and just get it done in the same day. So that is their concern, was that it was people who are depressed needed some time to cool off, a waiting period. And so we'll wait, we'll watch you see your doctor once or twice, and if you're sad, then, and if this is really depression and not terminal illness, then we'll do it. But I think the argument's ultimately specious, based both on ethics, like that's making people who are terminally ill suffer longer than they may need to, and also on evidence. There's simply no evidence that such people really exist under New York or under United States versions of the law.
Gregory, what was the time period they were proposing?
I don't recall if they proposed a time period. They were more attacking the fact that one didn't exist. I believe it was 14 days in some of the other bills in other states, but I don't recall.
And the bill passed the legislature by how many votes? I mean, the Assembly and in the Senate.
It was by I think it was a little bit past majority. I don't recall the exact count.
Okay, and did you get any Republicans to support it?
No, and there was some insider baseball. I learned about why that was the case, but at the end of the day, there were some sympathetic Republicans, but in the end of the day, none of them voted for it.
Why? Why do you think that
Um,
happened? If they were sympathetic,
Essentially because of higher party politics. So I'm not sure if I could go into more detail on that. I don't feel comfortable,
okay.
but essentially there was higher level folks saying some things in certain arenas, and it was kind of like it was not in their political interest to do it. And I sort of understand that because at the end of the day, it passed. And as a politician, why vote if it's if the thing you want is gonna
Right.
pass, if you're a Republican and you want it to pass,
Right.
and all you're doing is like wrecking your career, then why vote? So I sort of get it, but it's the disappointing state of play.
Well, you, a lot of disappointment in our political system. More disappointment than not. I guess the Catholic Church played a role, right? And they were pretty influential. I learned that during the Gay Rights Bill. As a Catholic, I was under extreme pressure from the cardinal, from the bishop. So, and they have a lot of influence. They're pretty powerful. Did they play a big role in terms of maybe the Republicans not supporting it? Or
Um, yeah, a huge role. And also perhaps they pushed some of the Democrats too as well. But like the Catholics, like there's a group. So there's been polls that show that New York Catholics do support it in the majority, and also Catholics Vote Common Good, which is a progressive Catholic activist organization, also supports it. So while the leadership, the conservative leadership, is opposed to it, a lot of Catholics in New York do support it.
it's like choice, when it comes to abortion. Most Catholics support choice, but obviously the leadership does not. So it's and they've got, as I pointed out, they do have a lot of influence, a lot of power, especially at a higher level. So that probably came down, um, filtered down to the legislators. Did any Democrats oppose it?
A few, yes, and they used somewhat progressive arguments, and some of them were they were kind of bad. I think they're the weakest of the arguments. At least the kind of abuse you see sometimes in Canada plausibly trickles down. There was one Democratic, I forget if it was assembly member or senator on the floor, who opposed it because they said like it could get out onto the streets and start being a drug of abuse. And it's like, no, it's like a mixed substance with like a heart medication in it and stuff. Like this isn't exactly going to get you high. And also that's the main concern. Like if that's your concern, like the hospice situation where there are opioids en masse is a much bigger problem. And like I said earlier, this thing's a powder that you don't mix till the last minute if you want it. And 40% of people actually never wind up using it. It kind of gives them peace of mind, but they don't actually wind up self-administering. And the New York also has specific strong laws for disposal after the fact that a lot of other states don't. So distribution was one. Prejudice against minorities is another, and that goes against all data, which shows that people of color overall make up, I forget the exact numbers, but it's like between 5 and 15% of United States cases. This, I mean, as a person of color, I like, I'm gonna try to up those numbers possibly if and when the time comes. But the numbers are not, the numbers really show that mostly upper middle class educated white people tend to use this, and also the passing the medical aid and dying bill may actually have a nice impact that has nothing to do with medical aid and dying, in that it mandates palliative care education that's culturally appropriate. And New York is really bad at palliative care. And just this alone, the fact that this law mandates it, may actually ease the suffering of folks a little bit more, even not even touching medical aid and dying, simply because it mandates that conversation and mandates the materials to be culturally appropriate.
Well, as someone who served in the legislature, I can testify that the characterization of New York being a progressive state is somewhat skewed on the negative side. It's really not. There are a lot of issues here. The political system is broken. Other states have a much better system than we do. So, this whole thing about the Empire State being progressive is just not the case. Before we wind up, any heroes in the legislation you can point to, lawmakers that really champion the cause, and you could say that without them, the bill might never have passed?
Oh, yeah, I would be embarrassed to list any because I'm going to be missing some. But I mean, Amy Paulin, Jessica Scarsella-Spanton.
She's my state senator in Staten Island, where I live. She was good. She was good on this bill.
She was an extremely major champion. Yeah. So there are lots, and there are also some like some people whose characterizations, like their characters are just like surprising, because there are so many incentives in New York politics to kind of be icky, to use the technical term. And one of the surprises as I was going through my mood swings of like New York State politics is awful, it's okay, it's great, it's awful, was like noticing like it's amazing that there are some really 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 good people like Amanda Septimo. She's just a great person. And there are lots of great people there who are being great people regardless of the incentives that are there. So that was a little eye-opening, that there are just some people who just genuinely really care. There are many who may not, but there are few who
there are good people. Unfortunately, they're caught up in a bad system. The system itself is just not aligned with the public, so they're caught up in that money in politics, and of course party politics. All that plays a role, which hampers the public interest. Do you guys have to use any contributions or inducements to legislators who support it or legislators who are against it? So you didn't do any of that?
No.
It's great. That's fantastic. It was just done.
Yeah,
done on the merits. Then people voted for it or against it on the merits. They weren't bribed, legally bribed, like we see on a regular basis. Now we know that the bill is not law in New York State at this point, right? It's sitting
right.
Governor Hochul's desk. So what do you think will happen here? Why hasn't she signed it yet?
Well, it's hard to say. It's like kind of like reading tea leaves. But I don't think we're alone, from my limited understanding of kind of how things go in Albany, that it's not uncommon for things to be pushed till later in the year. And I know a lot of other people who are not in medical aid in dying are also waiting for her to sign legislation. So I think it's just priorities for her, and we're not alone in that. It's not like we're necessarily being singled out. I think that overall we are going to keep the pressure on, and I encourage anybody who is listening and in favor of medical aid in dying to write a personal handwritten card to her office, telling your story and why you're in support, because those are useful overall. But yeah, I don't know. She made one public statement a while ago saying that she wouldn't let her Catholicism get in the way of things.
You're optimistic about signing the law.
I don't know. I try not to be optimistic because it often leads to disappointment. But I am less pessimistic than usual.
You're cautiously optimistic, is what I would say. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask you, people watching this podcast, what should they do to get their feelings across to Governor Hochul? Postcards, phone calls?
I would probably say the best impact is like a personal postcard or card. Like I sent a card on my mother's birthday describing the situation and things like that. So personal cards are number one. Phone calls are number two. You could send emails, but those are number three. And then like there are forms out there. I think There's a website, Medical Aid in Dying New York, which can send forms out, I believe. But the form letters are lowest impact. If you're crunched on time or don't know what to say, then that is fine. But probably mailing with personal stories, physical card is number one.
Good. I'm going to throw my 5 cents into those watching that I support the legislation. I've always studied this across. I mean, other nations have this in place, right? A couple of countries and a couple of states. And my old assistant, Karen Priscicelli Keogh, is secretary to the governor. So if she's listening, she's the second most powerful person in the state of New York. So Karen, talk to your boss and have her sign this bill. It's in the public interest. The safeguards are there. People like Gregory have devoted a number of years to this good cause, and I think that New York State should join the rest of the states that have this in place, and also some of the countries that have it in place. It's the way to go. And once again, the safeguards and the protections are there in this bill, and it will not be abused. And let's not continue to attack Canada. We blame Canada for everything. I'm sure it's working there as well if you drill down. But Gregory, congratulations. I commend your efforts. I hope the people that watch this get the message that you can make a difference. It's not easy in this system, but if you're persistent and you've got a compelling argument, you can make a difference. And Gregory, thank you for coming on to talk to us about this very important piece of legislation. And we'll stay in touch.
Thank you for all your support, and thank you for the invite.
You're welcome, Gregory. Take care. Bye.